Okay, here's how you beat Emma the Gentle Blade and Isshin Ashina, which, spoiler warning, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, is the final boss fight you get in the game if you choose to forsake Kuro when you meet Father Owl at the top of Ashina Castle. All play in this video is shown with a character who has an attack power of 8. If your attack power is lower, it just means you'll do slightly less damage, but the strats shown will work exactly the same. My combat skill of choice for this fight is Floating Passage, which is a skill you can buy for 5 carp scales from Pot Noble Haranaga in Harada Estate. Recommended passive skills are Shinobi Eyes for doing more posture damage after a Makiri counter, Descending Carp for doing more posture damage immediately after a deflection, Ascending Carp for doing more posture damage from a deflection, and Flowing Water for taking less posture damage from enemies with a sword, which applies to both of these bosses. You'll also want to have either an Umbrella or Firecracker prosthetic ready to use in the final phase. The one to pick will depend on the strat you prefer. I'll be using the Magnet Umbrella and the Shinobi Firecracker, but any of them will do the job just fine. The fight kicks off with a single round against Emma. You can pop an Eiko Sugar at the start if you want. From here we're going to play a patience game, waiting for her to attack so we can deflect. Resist the urge to attack first. The aim is to either deflect her attacks or avoid her attacks and then immediately counterattack by using the Floating Passage skill. If you do decide to attack first, don't use Floating Passage. Instead, just do a single swipe to bait her into attacking you back. The reason why Floating Passage is great as a counterattack skill is because neither Emma or Isshin can attack you while you use it. If used as a counter after defending against or avoiding one of their attacks, all they can do is defend against it, and if they try to attack, whatever attack they do will be shut down and they'll take damage. As long as you only use Floating Passage as a counterattack skill, your safety will be guaranteed, but they will definitely take both vitality and posture damage regardless of whether they guard against it or not. Any skill against a boss that guarantees damage and safety at the same time is a great skill to make use of, even if it's one of the least damaging combat skills available. The rest of the fight revolves around deflecting or avoiding her attacks to set up the counterattack, like jumping back from that Perilous grab attack and then following up with a Floating Passage. Another one to watch out for is when she backs off and sheathes her sword. When you see that, immediately get as far away from her as you can to avoid her forward rushing double slice move, which will give you damage most of the time even if you block it. Just get out of range, and once she's finished, counter with Floating Passage once again. She also has a Perilous thrust which can be Makiri countered, and she'll often do that at the very start of the fight. Another Perilous move she has is a swipe. This one you can jump on the spot and land on her head to do some posture damage. However, the thing is, all of her Perilous attacks can be avoided by jumping backwards, so if you want to make things simple for yourself, don't try to dodge her Perilous grab or Makiri counter her Perilous thrust. If you see the red kanji symbol, just jump backwards as fast as you can and you should be able to avoid every single Perilous attack she has to offer. So that's how to deal with her major attacks. For everything else, you'll need to be on top of deflecting. To start with, get used to spam blocking. Spam blocking doesn't mean mindlessly pressing block as fast as you can though. Instead, it means rapid tapping your block button in tune with the attacks coming your way, like here. All I'm doing to block her flurry is rapidly tapping block and trying to time the rhythm of that with her attacks. Let's watch a clip where all I do to beat her is deflect her attacks. In this clip, you'll also get to see more of her attacks and how I avoid them. Now, it may look like I'm timing perfect deflections in this, but I'm really not. What I'm doing is, I start to rapidly tap the block button just as I think the attack is about to come, or just as I think it's about to land. If she does a flurry, I keep rapid tapping throughout the flurry, but I also do my best to tap in tune with her attacks to maximize the number of deflects I can get. If I were to mindlessly do it, I'd get more blocks than deflects, and as a result my posture would end up more wrecked than hers. So even though you can block all of her attacks just by mindlessly tapping away, try not to do that. Instead, try to be thoughtful about how and when you tap away, and you'll find the game will award you way more deflects than not. Now, I'm not attacking back in this clip, but you should know if you do attack back with Floating Passage, you're going to want to immediately guard against attacks the moment the Floating Passage flurry is over. Both Emma and Isshin are prone to attacking you instantly after the Floating Passage is finished, so when you use it, always get ready for that. The best way, again, is to start rapidly tapping your block button the moment you finish doing the Floating Passage. They won't always attack you at that moment, but just in case, you should rapidly tap just in case all the time, because if they do, it'll happen so fast you won't have time to react otherwise. So you can see just by deflecting and mostly jumping back to avoid her perilous attacks, you can slowly but surely wear her posture bar down. You can also see that her range of attacks is actually fairly limited, and at least half of her normal sword attacks are so telegraphed that the need to rapid tap your block button is really barely there. I would also say that even though the strat I'm giving here is what I would consider the most consistent way to no damage both Emma and, as we'll soon see, Isshin, if you practice deflecting against Emma in this way, you'll end up with such a clean grasp on her moveset that if you end up dying to Isshin a few times, you'll come back and quickly find yourself powering through Emma with a more aggressive approach later. An aggressive approach to her can see her dead in seconds, and pretty safely so, providing you're completely comfortable with countering any attack she does while you're doing it. Alright, I think that's enough of Emma, especially since she is unquestionably an easier fight than what comes next. Just remember that to defeat her, you want to deflect her moves, avoid her red kanji symbol perilous attacks by jumping backwards in most cases, by getting as far away from her as you can if you see her sheathe her sword, as you'll know that big forward rushing double slice is coming, and finally by using floating passage on her immediately at the end of any attack she gives you that you successfully deflect or avoid. Next up is Isshin's first phase. Exactly like we did with Emma, be patient and wait for him to attack. Most of his attacks can be timed with rapid tapping block as well. However, rapid tapping does work a little less against him than it does with Emma. Also, he has a couple of attacks that must be timed perfectly. He has no special attacks in his first phase though, so this is all about waiting for his attacks, deflecting them, or avoiding his perilous attacks, and countering with floating passage. My best advice on deflecting Isshin is to start by rapid tapping when you think he's going to attack, and then when you get more used to his moveset, try to deflect purposefully instead of rapid tapping. With purposeful deflection, you can wreck his posture bar very fast, especially if you pop an Eiko Sugar right at the start of the round. Also, I'll attack there. Did you see him dodge that? What happens is he tends to counter any initial attack that you do, so just like we did with Emma, what we want to do is we want to be patient, avoid trying to attack first and let him attack, counter his attack, and then use floating passage once his attack run has been fully countered or dodged. You can, however, bait him into doing a specific type of attack that you want him to do by attacking first, and I'll show that in a moment. If you see him walk to the right like that, he's going to do a Makiri counterable move. As soon as you see him walk to the right, stop and don't press your stick or any other buttons, watch for the symbol, and as it fades away, press your dodge button. That will counter him every single time, and then you can immediately follow that up with a floating passage. He'll usually immediately counter with a strike of his own, so always be rapid tapping your block button the moment your floating passage ends. Also, you've already seen him do an Ichimonji double a few times now. If you time your dodge, you can dodge that to the right. However, in this phase I recommend stopping, standing still, and timing your block press to deflect it. Doing that will deliver him massive posture damage and give you a floating passage follow up too. It is quite easy to deflect this move because his arms and body start to move down long before the attack itself comes. When you see him starting to swing down, you can press block and it will be very forgiving for giving you a deflection if you press block before the attack hits. Obviously, if you time it too late, it'll do you massive damage, but if you press it even a little bit too early, you'll still get the deflection. Like Emma, Isshin will occasionally sheathe his sword, which is your cue to get as far away from him as you can, because he'll do the rush forward with two big damaging strikes, same move that Emma also did. Again, just like Emma, you have to avoid that, and then once he's completed, you can follow up with a floating passage counter. He also has a perilous thrusting attack that you can Makiri counter, this one's separate to the one where he walks to your right side, but both are Makiri counterable. Also, like Emma, he has a perilous grab move. This can be countered by dodging to the left or by jumping straight up, but the straight up jump will only work if timed perfectly and if you are right up in his face when he does it, so you should aim to dodge to the left when he does that. A single swing at him can sometimes bait him to do the grab attack that you can dodge to the left and then counter with a floating passage. So just like we did with Emma, let's watch a clip where I pretty much only deflect Isshin. You'll see all of his moves here and how I avoid them. The good news is, Isshin's final phase isn't much different to this, with the exception that he has 3 major new attacks, but all 3 of them can be comfortably avoided once you know how to counter them, so if you can get a handle on deflecting and avoiding his attacks in this phase, you'll have no trouble going into phase 3 and finishing him off. Also know that while you can Makiri counter 2 of his moves in this phase, you don't really have to. All of his Perilous attacks can be avoided by jumping back if you jump back and get out of the way the moment the red symbol appears. But my recommendation is to try to at least Mikiri counter him when he does the move that starts with him walking around you to the right, because that one is the easiest one to Mikiri counter by far. Just try not to confuse it with this one where he kind of leans towards your right, sheathes his sword and then swipes it across. This one you can counter by jumping up and landing on his head, or you can counter it by just jumping backwards out of the way. Although Isshin is different to Emma, your approach to the fight is basically the same. Try not to attack first, aim to deflect everything by rapid tapping block and purposefully timing your deflections wherever you can, counter attack whenever you deflect or avoid his attack with the floating passage skill, jump away from his Perilous attacks or Mikiri counter them, or the two that you can Mikiri counter if you're comfortable with doing that, and of course running as far away from him as you can if you see him sheath his sword. Now, you'll also notice that I haven't used any prosthetics either on Emma or on Isshin's first phase. That's because we want to save our spirit emblems for the final phase. In that phase, he has 3 brand new fire attacks, and the way we defend ourselves from those fire attacks will be either by shutting them down with the firecracker prosthetic, or defending ourselves from damage with the umbrella prosthetic. In both cases, it needs spirit emblems, so just in case the round goes longer than we anticipate, we want to make sure we have as many spirit emblems up our sleeve as possible. And since we don't need spirit emblems or prosthetics to beat Emma or Isshin in his first phase, there is absolutely no point in wasting them here. By now you've already seen every single attack Isshin has in his arsenal anyway, so I think we're good to move on to look at those 3 new attacks that he gains in his next phase. The first one we'll look at is his biggest one. What he'll do is crouch down and you'll hear him growl as he builds up the attack. He'll then light up the entire arena with fire, after which he'll launch forward and first hit you with a swipe before following up with a devastating flurry, which you can see here I was completely protected from by deploying the umbrella. Let's look at how that works in slow motion. When he crouches down, he builds up his power and then he lights up the floor with fire. But you'll see areas of the floor will be free of fire. Those are the areas where you want to stand. If you're in any of the areas that light up, those areas that light up there you don't want to be because they'll explode and put serious burn on you. So move to an area of the floor that's safe from fire and immediately deploy your umbrella. When he comes in to do the swipe and then the subsequent flurry, your umbrella will protect you completely, and because you were standing on an area of the floor without flame, you will take no burn damage either. The other way of dealing with this is with firecrackers. When he crouches down, throw firecrackers on him and that will interrupt that entire moment and he'll never actually get to deploy the fire or do the follow-up move. For his next fire attack, you'll see him raise his knee, get right in front of him, and just as he lowers his knee, dodge to the right and then immediately dodge to the right again so that you end up behind him and away from his second follow-up fire swipe. You'll then be in a perfect position to follow up with your own floating passage. But if you feel like you're too far away, jump backwards to avoid it. Go to the right or left though, because his third fire attack comes straight out. There it is there. It's a bit difficult to pick which one it will be, so always aim if you're further away from him to jump to the left or right to avoid the straight out one. But if you're up close with him, both of those attacks are avoided in the same way by dodging to the right and then to the right again so that you get behind him. Just never dodge to the left because one of his attacks will have a left swipe that will always get you if you do that. So ultimately this phase is pretty much the same as phase 1 of Isshin, but with the 3 extra fire attacks which you now know how to counter. The exception though is he doesn't do his Ichimonji double in this, so if you see him raise up, don't think he's doing an Ichimonji double. He's more likely raising his knee to do a fire attack. Don't try to deflect an Ichimonji double in this phase. Always dodge to the right every single time and then again to get behind him. So that's about all you need to know to win this fight. I have a full no damage fight already on my channel where I use firecrackers to shut down his biggest fire attack, so if you want to watch that I'll put a link in the description. But for this one I'll close out with a full no damage fight where I only use the umbrella to protect myself from the attack, so you can see more of that in action, and like usual I won't ruin it by talking over it. So thanks for watching and I hope this video helps you out. Enjoy!
Might. 再び修羅きっとさようとはな。Sekiro よ。ってやれぬか。